Let's bring in now Arizona Republican Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, member of the House Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. Congresswoman, thank you for being here. And I want to start here. Knowing what we know now, what do you think is the best protocol to protect teachers, students, and staff when COVID shows up at school?
Well, first, I want to say that individual teachers are applauded and do great jobs for our children. But this is the American Federation of Teachers. It's a union. It's a political organization. It's an arm of the Democrat Party and the Biden administration. They donate millions of dollars to the Democrat candidates and against Republican candidates. And so what happened is that there is evidence that the CDC reached out to the American Federation of Teachers, which Randy Weingartner is the president of, and asked for their input on school closure policy. And there is verbatim language that came from the AFT, American Federation of Teachers, that was included in the CDC guidance. And so we have learned now that kids are way behind. They're way behind in education. The ACT scores are at a 30-year low. And this was a wrong decision. It was a wrong decision to close the schools because the CDC is supposed to be operating on science. The CDC's own report said that children have a low occurrence of serious illnesses and low transmission rate, yet they reached out to the teachers union instead of science.
Now, what do you think if Ms. Weingarten was here or someone from the AFT was here right here with us? How do you think they would react to your claims that they are more about politics than they are about the pupils?
Well, she said in testimony that it had nothing to do with politics, but quite frankly, that's not the truth. Because in the summer of 2020, Randy Weingartner got on TV and in public media and criticized the Trump administration for trying to say, we want to reopen schools in the fall of 2020. And so she's just simply not remembering the truth as it was. And quite frankly,
no, I beg your pardon. I was saying that, and I'm going to show the exchange between the two of you in a second, but I was asking you what she would think, Ms. Weingarten would think, hearing you say that Weingarten, is more about politics and she put politics ahead of pupils. But let's move on for the sake of time here. As you well know, I mean, at the beginning of this crazy thing, there was so much, back and forth. People didn't know what to do with COVID, how to handle it, what it was, where it came from, all the rest, how it affected our bodies. But COVID is still here, as we know, but it is not as rampant, thankfully, as it was at the beginning of the pandemic. Who or what organization should provide guidance on COVID in schools?
Well, I think it's appropriate that the CDC does it, but that they should rely on science and not for political reasons, like consulting with the American Federation of Teachers. Because in Sweden, for example, they didn't close schools at all, and 0 Swedish children died from COVID-19. There were also studies out that said that children have a low transmission rate to adults. And so, I wish they would have followed their own science, because even the CDC had a report out saying that. And instead, it seems like they relied on, political reasons, including reaching out to the American Federation of Teachers, which is a political organization that supports Democrats and the Biden administration.
I guess, in that case, the teachers were the frontliners. They were there and they were trying to work it out. I'm sure everybody was trying to sort it out. Listen, because the bottom line here, Congresswoman, and I'm sure we all can agree on this, that the education of our children is priority, of course. So are lawmakers and Ms. Weingarten and other leaders in the elementary education field discussing ways now, like, school year schedules or extra programs to possibly make up for the learning loss to the pandemic?
Absolutely. In fact, we already funded through COVID funds more teaching in the schools so we can catch up the students. And so, this whole COVID Select Subcommittee that I serve on is about figuring out what we did right and what we did wrong. But it seems like closing schools was definitely the wrong decision to make at the time. There were private schools that were open. There were charter schools that were open. And then in my state of Arizona, they sent in non-teacher union folks to supervise kids in front of their laptop computers in a big room. And so why were those non-union school employees less susceptible to COVID-19 than teachers? I mean, it just, a lot of stuff didn't make sense. And that's why parents are so upset. And so we need to figure this out for the future because there will inevitably be another pandemic. And we need to rely on science and look at what other countries were doing, like Sweden, that didn't close their schools. They didn't have masking. They didn't have social distancing. And yet none of their children died from COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, you raised some sensible points, and I don't know what the Sweden's, I don't recall what their protocol was on vaccinations at the time. But listen, I agree. Our children are precious, and their education is everything. So good luck to helping to try to recapture some of the time lost, if possible. Congresswoman Debbie Lesko, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll have more news after this break. Take care, Congresswoman.